This ain't Texas. Ain't no hold'em.
Beyonce wrangled up plenty of attention with the release of her latest album, Cowboy Carter.
Her two-step into country music further carved her name in the history books, becoming the first black woman ever to top Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart. And while popular, her album has roped in criticism, with some people saying Beyonce doesn't belong in the genre.
But new tonight at 10, TH11's Michaela Johnson shows us how African-American culture has actually helped shape country music.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine.
When you think country music, Johnny Cash is classic.
Johnny Cash is one of the best known. I mean, Johnny Cash is just legendary.
His sound, the instruments, and vocals is what ethnomusicology professor Rolf Grosbeck describes as the blueprint for the genre.
Country music still is more likely to use steel guitar and instruments like banjo and fiddle than other instruments. Some have argued that it has to do with the use of diphthongs, and some have argued that, again, that it has to do with the vocal timbre.
But lately, the bounds of who is contributing and what is labeled country is expanding.
Music just continues to evolve.
Charles Hames, VP of the Arkansas Country Music Awards, points to the most notable at the moment, Beyonce's 8th studio album, Cowboy Carter.
This ain't Texas. Ain't no hold'em.
If you notice on her album, one of the guests on there is Linda Martell.
The album includes many notable country artists like Linda Martell, who in 1969 graced the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. She was the genre's first successful black female artist.
Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.
The tribute helping highlight that Beyonce's not the first.
I think that dispels anyone wanting to make any criticisms.
But there are still plenty of critics of her move into country music.
She's using a different vocal timbre, and I've wondered if that is part of the controversy.
Cowboy Carter has a touch of soul and blues blended with what you might consider typical country.
She's kind of using maybe an R&B vocal timbre. It's a little hard for me to describe, but there's a lot of country motifs in terms of what she's doing. It really fuses a lot of things. I think we're realizing that a lot of these boundaries between genres, including racial and ethnic boundaries, are blurred, and they're on some level arbitrary.
Grosbeck's point tracks.
Breaking the record for the most Grammy wins of all time.
After making history by winning her 32nd Grammy, Beyonce continued the trend, becoming the first black woman to top country music's charts, sitting there for 10 weeks. And the 11th week went from one black artist to another. Shaboozie's single, A Bar Song, Tipsy, jumped from number 6 on the Hot Country chart to number 1, dethroning Texas Hold'em. Now these songs aren't just topping charts, but also starting a conversation about the history of African Americans' impact on the genre.
What was erased is the predecessors, as the African Americans who were creating the music out of which country music emerged.
The history and erasure of it goes back more than a century.
I like to date the beginning of country music with the beginning of the record industry, but its roots are much, much older than that. When African Americans were brought from Africa to the United States, in general, a lot of they were often prevented from bringing musical instruments.
Enslaved, their culture forcibly left behind, they had to start over.
Since so many of the enslaved Africans came from West Africa, there's an instrument in that area called konting, another called jalam, another called ngoni, and all of them seem to be somewhat similar to what we now call the banjo.
African Americans created old sounds with new instruments, a washboard, bone castanets, and the banjo, sounds synonymous with country. But that creation of a new musical identity took a dark turn.
In the early 19th century, there was a creation of a new genre called the minstrel show. It's one of the ugliest periods in American musical history.
White people painting their faces black, eyes and lips white or red, imitating African Americans for white audiences. These shows would impact culture and music.
Due to the influence of the minstrel show, white people thought of the banjo as a white instrument, when in fact it wasn't.
It's something that would carry into the development of the country music genre.
When the country music industry came about, the assumption was made that this was white music recorded for white audiences.
But every so often, black musicians made waves that struck a chord, like the genius Ray Charles. His talents even came through Arkansas on the Chitlin circuit.
Multiple black artists on one show and just go to these towns. As he's one of 3 African Americans in the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Like one of the things he does in the original I'm Moving On, it's like he just covered all the ranges. He added this call and response between like a solo vocal and group vocal to give it kind of an R&B flavor, and it became this big hit in the country music charts as well as in the R&B charts.
In the Country Music Hall of Fame, he joins DeFord Bailey and Charlie Pride.
The legacy of these black musical icons are what Groesbeck calls to in present day.
These instances of African American musicians kind of making contributions to the country music industry. If Louis Armstrong has the right to play on country music recordings, then certainly Beyonce has the right to sing country music styles.
Groesbeck and Hames share the same sentiment. All musicians have the right to make all music.
Country music and its lyrics has probably always spoke to the common person.
To break down boundaries, that I think what we're talking about, what Beyonce is doing, is just a harbinger of what's going to be happening for the rest of the century.
Michaela Johnson, THV 11 News.